Welcome, my name is 𝘍𝙬𝙬𝙬. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director based in Dallas, Texas. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be talking about Visual Studio Team System, giving you a brief overview of the feature set and the purpose for its existence. Basically, the idea is there's going to be a new line of Visual Studio products based on Visual Studio Professional. So you're going to have a scenario where you have a Visual Studio tool set primarily for developers, and they're basically going to be expanding the tool set to where we also now have tools not just for developers, but for testers, for architects, infrastructure architects, and even for project managers. The point behind Visual Studio Team System is to now enable the entire software development team, not just the developers. Microsoft has generally recognized that they do a really good job with developer tools. You have Visual Basic 6, you have VB.NET, C#, etc. They pretty much got that space nailed. Now, where they have issues, however, is it takes more than just programmers to actually develop a software system. So what we want to do is actually expand this out and actually have tools for the entire project team. And that's what I want to briefly describe to you. So basically, you've probably seen this slide before, which is basically the Lego box slide, where you have the different versions of Visual Studio Team Editions. You have a version for architects, a version for developers, and a version for software testers. The first thing I want to really focus on, though, is I want to talk about something called Visual Studio Team Foundation Server. That's going to be the brown box at the bottom of the slide. What you're essentially going to have here is a set of features. Each one of these little gray boxes represents a feature in a specific product. So this screen actually represents many different product SKUs that you could actually purchase. And I want to talk about what the different versions are and how that's going to impact you and what you would need to buy if you wanted to adopt Team System and how you would go about doing so. So Team Foundation Server basically is going to enable the collaboration and central repository information for the Team System platform. First off, you're going to have a build server capability if you have Team Foundation Server. One of the more interesting things that people are concerned with is a source control repository. So this is not Visual SourceSafe. There is a new version of Visual SourceSafe called Visual SourceSafe 2005. This is actually a completely independent product. The new source control system, Team Foundation Version Control, is actually going to have a SQL Server 2005 backend. So what you're going to have is a much more robust, scalable platform for managing your software artifacts. This Team Foundation Server product will not just be used by your developers and your source code, it will also be used by your testing team, your architect team, and even to some degree your project managers and your analysts. On top of that, also in Team Foundation Server, you're going to have something called a work item tracking system. Work items are units of work or tasks that people actually have to accomplish when doing a software project. That could be bugs or defects, that could be scenarios, that could be requirements, that could be just general types of tasks. Think of this from the standpoint of a Microsoft project task. Think of it from the standpoint of a defect. Think of it from any unit of work that needs to be accomplished on a software project. That's basically a work item. It's something that gets assigned to somebody. They have to work it, and when they're done working it, they basically mark it resolved or closed. This allows you to manage and track items going through your life cycle of your software project. That's the work item tracking system. That's enabled by Team Foundation Server. Both the build, the work item tracking, and the change management system, the source control system, all gather data as you're working and report those into a data warehouse, which then allows reporting capabilities so you can actually track and run reports on the project itself in real time. You're going to have a project site based on Windows SharePoint Services that allows IT management, business users, CIOs to actually go out and very easily determine what is the status of your software project, how many bugs do you have, how many outstanding issues, what are the current status of all of our tasks. And then we're going to have some project management capabilities we'll talk about as well. That's the capability at the foundation level. This is your core feature set for the new source control and the work item tracking system. Then what you're going to have is you're going to have client products that sit on top of and connect to this Team Foundation Server. So it's a client-server model. So Team Foundation Server is a server, just like SQL Server, BizTalk Server, Exchange Server. You will go and install it on a Windows Server 2003 machine on your network. Okay? Once that's done, then you need to actually have a client license to actually connect to it. So the licensing model here is Server Cal. Team Foundation is the server. You will purchase that. You will install that. Then you actually need a client access license to connect legally to that server. You're going to see a gray box here that says Team Explorer plus Cal. All of the green boxes indicate actual products you can purchase, Visual Studio Team Edition for software architects, for developers and testers, and they include a client access license for Team Foundation Server. Alternately, you can still buy Visual Studio Professional. Visual Studio Professional 2005 will contain most of the feature set of Visual Studio Enterprise Architect today. If you want, you can have Visual Studio Professional, which is all you need really to write code, do development, write ASP.NET applications, Windows Forms applications. You can purchase the client access license, Team Explorer actually snaps into Visual Studio Professional, and then you can actually use Visual Studio Professional plus your client access license to connect to Team Foundation Server. That'll basically give you the new source control system, the work item tracking system, all within your development environments. Likewise, if you have a project manager and they want to interface with Microsoft Project, they can do so. There's an add-in for Microsoft Project that allows Project to actually synchronize with the work item database. In doing so, they're going to need a client access license. They will connect to the work item database, and they will be able to actually pull data from a task perspective out of the work item system and into Microsoft Project. They can do project planning in Project as they normally would, and then they can take that data and publish it back into the Team Foundation server. So that's going to be those two bottom options. I really want to now focus on the individual product SKUs. So you're going to have a Visual Studio Team Edition for software architects, where you're going to have all of the modeling and architecture tools. You're going to have a Visual Studio Team Edition for software developers, which is going to be more of your code analysis, your unit testing, and products feature sets in there. And I want to draw your attention to the long bar here, which is class modeling. Class modeling you're going to oftentimes see associated with Visual Studio Team System. It will actually be available in Visual Studio Professional and Visual Studio Standard editions. There's going to be the third version here for software testers. From a lifecycle perspective, you're going to have the architects at the very early part. They're going to be doing the modeling and the diagramming out of the application, setting up the architecture. Once that architecture is done, they will implement that in code, and they will then take that over, and the software development team can actually start working about implementing the architecture that the architects define. The work item tracking system allows you to actually map artifacts and work from architects to developers. Everything's going to be tracked in the work item tracking system. The models created by the architects will actually be stored in the source control system, and then the developers will be taking their code and checking it into the underlying source control system. So the couple of features that you have from a Visual Studio Team Edition for software developer perspective is you're going to have some analyzer tools for your code, you're going to have a profiling tool, and you're going to have unit testing. So if you've used InUnit in the past or InCover, you will actually have built-in unit testing capabilities within both the software developer and software tester versions of Visual Studio Team Edition. The unit testing tool basically is going to have a couple of nice features. First, it's built right into the development environment, and it will actually generate test cases for you. So if you have a class and there are methods on that class that you want to write test cases for, you can literally right-click and create tests, and it will generate the test for you. And then within the testing framework, you can run those from within the Visual Studio environments. That's the unit testing piece. You're going to have a static code analyzer piece, which is the traditional FX cop functionality actually built into the build process in your software project. So it's actually a project property setting. You right-click on a project in Solution Explorer. You'll actually go turn on what is equivalently FX cop. It's now called static code analyzer. That will actually scrub your IL and basically determine, does your code actually comply with what the rules are that are defined in the tool. That's going to be the core feature set of Visual Studio Team Edition for software developers. The last piece here is Visual Studio Team Edition for software testers. You're going to have load testing here, and load testing is actually now broken out from web testing. You're going to create web tests that allow you to record and actually play back an interaction with a web server, and then you're going to have the option to take those web tests and run them under load. A load test is essentially the idea of taking a web test and running it really, really fast and repeatedly under load. The interesting thing is since they've broken it up, you can actually run your unit tests under load. So if you have a layer of unit tests that hit a data access layer, I can run those under load, and I'm essentially stress testing my database without the need for a web application. The other piece that you've got in the Software Tester Edition is something called manual testing. This is the type of test that your QA department often does, where they have scripts, manual scripts in a Word document or an Excel document, where they're actually going out and stepping through manually, running through an exercise and recording whether or not the project actually passes based on a particular build, based on a particular test. The manual tests that get created will be either Microsoft Word documents or ASCII text. They will be checked into and out of the source control system. They will be versioned and stored in Team Foundation server. When you execute any type of test, be it load test, manual test, web test, unit test, the results of those tests can actually be published in a Team Foundation server. You can then run reports off of that to determine whether or not your tests are actually successfully working and whether successfully or failing in the other case there. So you're going to have that capability. The last thing I want to mention is basically the build server process. You have this concept of an automated nightly build. When developers check code into the source control system, they can actually associate work items. So if I'm working on a bug, I check code and I say, that's the work item that I just finished. That's the bug I fixed in this check-in. That will then tie into an automated nightly build so that in the morning when my tester comes in, they will get a build report telling them that that bug has been fixed in the build that's now in their QA environment. So all three pieces together, the architect, developer, and tester tool, sitting on top of Team Foundation, basically enables a full life cycle, keeping in mind that your project managers are actually tying in through this whole process. That concludes basically our Visual Studio picture. I want one last little shot here of the slides where we're basically talking about the different roles of your project team interacting with the same Team Foundation server from a collaboration perspective using different tools. Thank you for your time.